Well, hello you. I'm so happy you came by today. This is Shane with Shane's Books and Review, and I hope you're having a great day today. It is Friday. We made it through the week, and we're going to be talking about Paradox Bound, wrote by Peter Clines. It follows this kid by the name of Eli Teague. As I mentioned on Monday, it is a very interesting little story. It has to do with history, has to do with traveling through history, not necessarily time travel. They're not going back and forth to change anything. Indeed, something very important has been lost and they're trying to find it. This thing that was lost was the American dream, of all things that could be lost. And so there's all kinds of little things that are happening and moving throughout the book. Eli, whenever he's a young kid, ends up meeting up with a young male by the name of Henry. Henry is broke down right pretty much in front of his house, and he's so young that he's not even supposed to cross the road yet without his mom's help. But Henry has broken down and is very clearly working on an older car that really doesn't belong there, and it looks completely different, so it gets the kid intrigued. Eli walks over and starts talking to Henry. Henry's out of fuel. Hey, there's this gas station pretty close to here, but we don't use gas, we use water. This really gets Eli going. These days, what kid wouldn't get going over something like that? It's a very unique concept. As he is wanting to help Henry and is hanging out there, although Henry is very clearly trying to shoo him away, he ends up looking down Henry's shirt and sees breast. Oh my goodness. Well, as I mentioned on Monday, that was a very well done way to... It does play into things, and it's unique to see how Peter Clines was able to keep the story true to itself. This scene isn't visited just once. It comes back around. And there are other scenes that are hinted to, alluded to, or come around upon themselves. And thus is the issue with a paradox. There's not an issue with the book. Let's be open and upfront about it. If you like books that are time travel based, or if you like Doctor Who, that sort of a thing, this might be something for you to check out. It was a engaging read, where there's been books that I've read before that are about time travel and etc. And I'm like, Doesn't necessarily leave a bad taste in my mouth, but it's also not anything that I would go back to. This book, on the other hand, is something I will go back to because it was such a joyous thing. Unlike other authors, instead of getting caught up on the details of names and this theory and that theory, and really locking themselves into a time frame of when they wrote the book, a lot of that is left open. And in fact, it is very intuitive the way that they travel through history looking for the American dream. As I mentioned on Monday, there's a plethora of characters, not too many though, but the ones that you do meet will be rememberable. And John Henry is one of them. For me, he was a personal favorite in the book by many a means, and it had to do, of course, with the story. And come to find out, it was all just a hoax of a salesman, and John did win. Twice. Also, there's these little items in the story that enriches it, like favors. Favors are a big thing in the book. You don't hand them out unless you actually mean it. And whenever you get one handed out, it's almost like a magic token. And the way that they are handled and the way that you can communicate in history and traveling through history is so much more clever and unique than the way that we do these days. Sure, we have these little magic things like this where we can send messages back and forth instantaneously. But what happens if you're in a pickle, you're getting hunted down, and you're in 1873, and you need to get out in the next 3 minutes? That was handled in this book, and it was done in a good way. It was enjoyable, pretty much all the way through. Whenever it comes to this sort of book, I really enjoyed the dialogue choices that Peter made. Henry, or Henrietta, she is from an earlier time than Eli is. Eli speaks more like we would, but she still has that prim and proper way of speaking, which was enduring in a lot of ways. Some people might find it grating. I found myself really enjoying that character. I also found myself enjoying Eli. Eli was a programmer, worked for a bank before he accidentally got himself caught up. Now, as mentioned, his town is a place that is a sleepy little place lost in history, meaning that even though time is flowing around it, time is not flowing for it. Kind of a lost in history is something that everyone can relate to because it's that town that you drive through that still has those houses that look brand new, the 1800s, or it's the place that you go to that still doesn't have anything except for a rotary phone phone on the wall. Very little electronic stuff in it. And this is kind of a very unique concept that was put into the book. This wouldn't have happened by accident. Whenever they're saying that in this book, what they're getting at is that because of the American dream, whenever everybody is at their greatest, or their concept of what something is the greatest it can be, it can get locked into where it's at. So if you live in a town and everybody's like, this is the best place ever, it's going to stay right where it's at in the timeline. So let's hope that you've got a theater with more than one screen and it's got Dolby Atmos and it can show whatever you like, because if not, you'll never have it. But with all that, moreover, I found myself enjoying the character interactions to one another. Eli getting to know people and the way that the town behaves that all the history travelers go to. And that was a clever little device as well, and it was well done. Just to give you a bit of a heads up, there's 3 bars in this town and not much else. Now the buildings are still there in the story after the fact, but the history travelers would probably only ever go there 3 times in their life if they can, because there are 3 bars. On your first trip you go to this bar, on this trip you go to this bar, on this trip you go to this bar. That way you don't run into past iterations of yourself and you can keep your sanity. Because how tempting would it be really if you ran into a past version of yourself to go, hey, whenever you go and do this, make sure you don't do that. How many issues would that cause really? Now let's talk about the baddies, because there are some baddies in this book and they are formidable. They are very certain themselves and everything around them. They are the faceless men. It's referenced that they are the reason why the stories of the men in black suits, those rumors exist, but they are actually faceless. They don't have eyes, they don't have mouths, they don't even have to breathe. Their strength is immense. They can take all kinds of damage that a normal human being would never be able to handle. They have this ability called certainty that allows them to know what is happening around them within a particular range. And it is because of their sacrifice of their eyes, mouth, and identity and selves, because they even forget their own names whenever this process is done to them. And I think that's about all I'm going to tell you about them, because they are a very integral part of the book. One of the bad guys I absolutely loved. Not because he went through any kind of transformation or anything like that, but because he stayed true to himself and who he is. And that made that a very interesting scene. All in all, again, it's a book about history travel, not time travel. And the characters are lovable, fallible, and eccentric. And right where you think that the book is going to end, it doesn't. A lot of the time I would really like for books to wrap up sooner so that they leave some things open to the imagination, because everybody, for whatever reason, has this thing these days where they want everything to be locked down. It doesn't let the characters live on sometimes because they're so locked into the story. And that's okay sometimes. But in this book, it was the other way around. I mentioned this on Monday. Sometimes I read a book or experience something and I'm like, man, I really wish that I could know more. Or I wish that these characters could have more story so they could live on a little bit more and I can enjoy that. I'm sure there's a book or two that you guys and gals have read that you would love to have a sequel to. Yeah, I'm curious. What would they be? Let me know down there in the comment box. I'd love to know. And for me, this is one of those. If another book by Peter Clines came out with these characters in them, oh, I would love to read that. Today's book was Paradox Bound by Peter Clines. Hope you enjoy it as much as I did. If you check it out, like, share, subscribe. This is Shane from Shane's Books and Review, and I will see you on Monday.